Now I'm going to start this video out with a couple different quotes from actor Simon Pegg. One of them, the first one, was said by him roughly 7 years ago and shortly before The Force Awakens came out, and that's a film he's in playing the character Unkar Plutt. And for the record here, he's referring to or talking about the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Anyway, at that time he said this: "I don't really have any respect for anyone who thinks those films are good. They're not. They're a monumental misunderstanding of what the original 3 films are about. It's an exercise in utter infanticide, like George Lucas killing his kid." And then in a much more recent interview from a few days ago, he was being asked about which are the hardest fans to please from among franchises like Star Trek, Star Wars, and Doctor Who, and he had this to say: "To be honest, and as someone who kind of was, kicked off about the prequels when they came out, the Star Wars fan base really seems to be the most kind of toxic at the moment." In this interview, he then goes on to sort of apologize for his part in hating on the prequels, pointing out that in the case of a character like Jar Jar Binks, who of course got tons of hate, there was a real human being behind it, and that he feels bad about being a part of any sort of suffering he, the actor Ahmad Best, endured. He then goes on to talk about how Star Trek, from the very beginning or very start back in the 1960s, has been inclusive and diverse and progressive. He then finishes by saying of Star Wars that suddenly there's a bit more diversity and everyone's kicking off about it. It's really sad. Okay, so first of all here, and as someone who very much enjoys the prequels and always has, what Simon Pegg said about them, or perhaps I should say what he said about the people who liked them and the person who created them in that first quote, and it's also far from the only negative thing he's ever said about those films or Lucas, well, it doesn't really bother me all that much. Mainly because I try and usually succeed in just not letting the opinions of others annoy me or change how I personally feel about something. I don't let the quote-unquote toxic opinions of others poison my enjoyment of something because why should I? Why should I care, much less take to heart, how someone else feels about something I liked or enjoyed? I mean, there are literally billions of people on the planet, so of course there are going to be some out there who don't like something that I did, and that's absolutely fine. And in my book, it's just as okay for someone to go out there and express why they didn't like something, as it is for someone to go out there and express why they did like it. Though I think you should always strive to be civil about it either way. And when someone isn't being civil, or worse yet, they're trying to provoke, I don't know that firing back with insults or harsh remarks of your own gives you any sort of moral high ground, shall we say. And I do get it. There are few things more annoying than someone stating their opinion like it's an absolute fact, and all but saying anyone who disagrees with them must be an idiot. I think we've all had that moment, more than once, no doubt, where we read or hear something on the internet that we feel is so asinine and misguided that we want to scream out in frustration. And I'd imagine for some, one of those times could be hearing or reading what Simon Pegg, of all people, who again is a rather famous or infamous prequel hater, what he said about how sad it is that Star Wars fans are kicked off about a little more diversity in the franchise. When what the vast majority of fans are unhappy about, or really upset or disappointed by, is the quality of the content itself. They feel what Disney has been doing is a monumental misunderstanding of what Star Wars is or should be, which is what Simon Pegg said about the prequels. In other words, here is someone who should get it, and no doubt he does. I mean, I don't think Simon Pegg is an idiot. He has to know what's really going on with the fandom these days. That they're, again, disappointed that the content is not as good as it should be, perhaps, or in their opinion, and they're speaking up about it. They're doing the same thing he once did. He knows firsthand that attacks on a character do not or should not automatically equate to attacks on the person behind or playing the character, or that sometimes you just don't think about it, even having said this in an interview back in 2018. I feel so ashamed of the fact that there was actually a victim, a human victim in that. I think most people were regarding Jar Jar Binks like he was a real character and wailing on him for being annoying or whatever, or not liking him. But there was a person behind that, and I read that and just thought, Christ, I'm one of those people. It makes me feel awful. And let's be real here, he, especially as someone in the business, he obviously knew there was a real person behind Jar Jar Binks, as he knew George Lucas was a real person when he criticized him. But he still had every right to state his opinion about them or their work or the characters they play, because they were the ones who chose to put themselves out there in the industry, even though, yeah, we could certainly argue he went too far. Nevertheless, the simple truth is that, like it or not, right or wrong, when you achieve a level of fame, especially if you willingly seek it out, like by being in a movie or something, especially one like Star Wars with a massive fan base, well, you have to be willing to accept criticism. You have to know that there will be those out there who don't like you or what you do, and they're going to say as much. It just comes with the territory or with the business. I mean, along these same lines, look at professional athletes for just a moment. Look at the level of criticism and scrutiny they face on a daily basis. They literally have every move and decision they make on the field or on the court or whatever it might be. They have it discussed and analyzed down to the most minute detail by everyone and anyone. From shows on sports networks to podcasts on the internet to friends just sharing a drink and watching a game. They work in a business where losing even one single step or making one bad play can have people calling for their figurative head or demanding for their removal, all the while calling them some rather unflattering names. But just because one person, let's say a fan of the Clippers, might take to Twitter to call LeBron James of the Lakers a bum, or even literally shout that or something worse at him during a game in the heat of the moment, you could say, or to distract him or try to get into his head, it doesn't mean that person is saying something or anything about everybody and anybody else who may share a trait of some kind with LeBron. Nor does it mean that all Clippers fans share that one singular fan's sentiments. They don't get to represent everybody just because they said something mean to LeBron James. And it's the same way Simon Pegg saying or comparing the prequels to George Lucas murdering his own baby doesn't mean he truly feels that way about Lucas, that he'd kill his own child. It was just something, albeit dumb and way too far, yes. It was just something he said in the heat of the moment to essentially make a point. Which doesn't necessarily make it right, but I think we'd find it ridiculous if someone tried to claim that him saying that about Lucas meant he was saying something against everyone and everyone else who may look like Lucas or share some sort of trait with him. His words also didn't in any way, shape, or form represent the feelings of others who didn't like the prequels or the fanbase as a whole, which does have people who like the prequels in it. And yet a person who should understand all of that through both experience hating on the prequels himself and being an actor who no doubt knows that criticism comes with a territory, instead of not necessarily defending angry fans, but at least explaining where they're coming from usually, and that when you get upset you don't always think about who you might be hurting, which again doesn't excuse it or make it right, but that doesn't mean it makes you a horrible person necessarily. Anyway, the real sad part here is that a person who could have sort of been an ambassador for the fan base, who truly gets it, who gets how passionate fans can be, and who himself has, shall we say, fallen into the trap of going way too far, though not intending actual hate or harm towards anyone, I would assume, he decided to call the whole Star Wars fan base the most kind of toxic, because, mind you, he didn't bother to distinguish or make any sort of separation whatsoever here. He didn't say it's only some fans, he painted the whole fan base with a broad brush, claiming it's toxic because of a little more diversity kicking us off. He tried to take the moral high ground to forgive himself for his past poor behavior and mistakes by condemning millions upon millions of people today. He essentially went for virtue points, a currency more valuable than gold for some, instead of actually doing what was right. Instead of saying, yeah, fans can be a bit much and go too far sometimes, I know that firsthand, but for most of them, there's no actual or real hate behind it, just disappointment and frustration over something they love. And no, I'm not in any way trying to excuse anyone who does send hateful messages or tweets or whatever to actors or writers or whoever they might be. Anyone who hates people based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and so on, I'm not making excuses or trying to defend them. In fact, you're simply not a Star Wars fan if you've done something like that. What I'm trying to do is defend those who wrongly get lumped in with people like that. I'm sick and tired of broad statements about the Star Wars fan base when I interact with that fan base on a daily basis. And I know, by and large, it is made up of truly good people who, yes, maybe love it a bit too much sometimes and go too far, but that doesn't mean they deserve to be called terrible things because they have the audacity to criticize movies and shows that they're paying to see. That doesn't mean they need a Hollywood actor to get up on the high ground and to look down upon them and chastise them for something they themselves not only understand, but has done. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about what Simon Pegg had to say. Are you disappointed? Do you not care? Or was this maybe a chance for someone to finally really stand up for the fans and to defend them? to explain the other point of view here. Whatever you think, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.